What I'm working on today is early stages of woodwork for a whole new bunch of guitars. Now I've got a load of necks here which I started work on several weeks ago and they've been sitting waiting for the next stage. So we'll talk about all of that in another video. What I'm going to talk about today is early stages of preparing body blanks. So what I've got here is a body blank as it's come from the supplier. It's been roughly faced up one side and a bit slightly more roughly faced up the other side. It's oversized, but this particular blank isn't very oversized. There's enough wood in here to get out what I need, but it's a little bit tight. So what I would probably do if it was thicker than this, I would run it over an overhand planer to face up one side, then through the thicknesser to take it down to thickness. But there's a couple of things with this which mean I won't do that. First of all, you need to have a very wide planer thicknesser to do this. You need a 15-inch one at least. I don't have a 15-inch planer thicknesser, but I do have access to one. My good friend in the workshop next door has one, so I can use that. But I'm not going to do that on this because that is a little bit less accurate in the early stages, and when you've got something which isn't completely true, you can end up taking off a little bit more wood than you want, and you can end up being a bit tight for thickness and end up possibly under thickness. So what I'm going to do is do this a slightly more manual way, but it's a little bit more precise, and I have a little bit more control over where I take the wood off. So the first thing I need to do is to get one side flat. So to do that, what I do is I use this, which is a surface table, which is nice and flat. And then first thing I do is look at what shape the body is, whether it's, you can see that, probably difficult to see with the video, but that, if I put that straight edge across there, and across the other side, so it's rocking on that side. So this piece is cupped like that, which is perfectly normal with a piece of wood. So the easiest way to flatten that is to put this with the curve upwards and put that down on the surface table, and then we can see where it rocks and where it's, so I can see if I put it the other way up, that will just rock from side to side and I'll have to take a whole load out of the middle. This way, by putting it with the curve up, I can take any twist out of it. So I can see here that it doesn't rock that way, but it does rock ever so slightly that way, just a sort of a millimetre or so. So I know that these two corners are slightly high. So what I'll do then is I know it's this corner and that corner. Put that back on the bench, and with my trusty smoothing plate, I can just take a little bit off of there. And a little bit off of there. Now that won't be enough, but it should have improved ever so slightly. I put that back on the surface table, and oh, that's actually not bad. It's actually pretty much it. That's not moving just a tiny, just a hair. So I probably need just a hair off of there, and I think that will probably do it. Yep, that's it. Now that doesn't make, excuse me, that doesn't make this side completely flat, but it does mean it will sit flat. These four corners are flat effectively. We've still got a bit of a scallop out of here, but what I can then do is move on to the next stage. The next stage is to true the other face up using my thickness sander, which works in exactly the same way as a sort of planer thicknesser, except it has, rather than planing, cutting the wood off, it sands the wood off. So it's slower process, but in some ways it's better. If you've got particularly figured wood or wood with interlocking grain, you can get quite a lot of tear out with a conventional thickness planer. I mean, there are sort of different, spiral cutter blocks you can get, but I don't have a spiral cutter block, so that's not really a practical thing for me. But the sander, you don't get any tear out, and if you've got an expensive bit of very highly figured wood, then this is a much better way of doing it. So the way this works is there are two drums in here, rotating drums, covered with coarse, I think it's about 80 grit sandpaper. This conveyor belt here moves, and and it's also adjustable up and down, so I can adjust the distance between the table and the sanding drum, and I simply pass the piece of wood through multiple times, take a little bit off each time. So I'll demonstrate that, not on this piece, but on another one that's about ready to go through. I'll put that to one side, and in order to do that, I have this carriage, which is completely flat board and has another little piece of wood just nailed to it there, which helps to ensure that nothing moves, and it's just all carried through nice and flat. So because this surface on here is slightly flexible, it's got little sort of rubber dimples on it, and it won't really happen on a large piece of wood like this, but on the smaller pieces of wood they can rock a tiny bit, and you don't end up with it perfectly parallel. So everything I put through the thickness sander, I put on this larger flat piece of ply, and then that sits flat and that won't rock. So that's how I do this. So in order to start truing this face up, I run some pencil lines across here, as you can see, just so I can see where everything is, where the sander has touched. I mean, I can see where it's touched anyway, but that's just a little bit of a guide. And I'll run that through a couple of times, and you can see the beginning of the process. In order to make sure this is the right height, I'm somewhat cautious because I don't want to jam it through with it set too high. So I'll make sure it's really clear, and I'll start running it through and slowly raise this bed until it just touches the top of here. And then it's a matter of running that through multiple times. I turn it very, very little each time, so I'm just taking, fractions of a millimetre off each time. Any more than that and it can jam up, which is not a pleasant experience, I can assure you. And I do 2 passes at each thickness. Otherwise it just loads the belt up too much and it doesn't work well. So I'll do a couple of passes, and we'll have a look and see how we get on. So I'll put a mask on and get started. Well, I've put this through the thickness sander a couple of times, and normally I would just carry on until this side was flat, but I've stopped now just to demonstrate how it looks. You can see we've taken some wood off here and a little bit here, which indicates that this piece of wood was slightly twisted, and these were the high bits. Now, as with the other piece, I trued this face up here. Well, that's got a little bit of tape there. That was just to take up the last little bit of flatness, and then that side's flat, that sits on here, and we then true this face up to the other one. So I'll continue with that process, and eventually this face will be completely flat and completely parallel with the other one. So I won't do all of that now, but I'll demonstrate one. I'll show you one which I have done that too. So we'll do that next. And in best Blue Peter style, here's one I prepared earlier. So this is a body blank which has had all of the previous stages done. So now what we have is a piece which is flat and true and with both sides parallel, and to a nice even thickness. I don't take them to final thickness at this point. That's quite important. I leave them a little bit oversize, to a couple of millimeters oversize or so. This one might look a bit thin, but this is going to be one of my SGTO models. So this has an 1.5 inch thickness body, or 38 millimeters, and this is currently 41 and a bit. So we're still a few millimeters oversize. I do that at this stage. I leave that because what you can find is if you take it down to its final thickness and then cut the body shape out of it, whenever you cut wood, you can relieve a little bit of internal stress, and it can move ever so slightly. So if you've got it at its final thickness and you cut it out and it moves, they don't always move, but sometimes they do, you then got a body that's slightly twisted and no scope of getting rid of it. So what I do is cut the body shape out at this thickness, and then bring it to final thickness after I've cut the body shape out. So I'll show you a couple of those that I've done and which are ready to go. So here's a couple of body blanks that I've roughly bandsawed out, oversized to the final shape, but still very close to the final shape. And the body is still slightly oversized. So what we can do now is see whether any of these have moved. This one is nice and flat still because that's just gone through the thickness sander. So if we go back to the surface table, I haven't tested these, so this is exactly as you find it. And maybe a cigarette paper there. Close to, yeah, there's a tiny bit. You can see that's just moved just a tiny little bit. But close to nothing, you know, fractions of a millimeter. But still, nonetheless, we can remove any of that. So now what I'll do with that after it's sat for a few days is I'll go back through and do the same process again. I'll sit it on the board, back through the thickness sander. I can take out any tiny irregularities. So it's completely flat, completely true, and exactly the thickness I want it. Then we can move on to machining the perimeter, machining all the routes and everything else. Leaving it oversized also gives you a bit of scope for removing. Sometimes you get little blemishes in the surface of wood. This one has a number of blemishes on the back, which are absolutely no problem. This one will be this is for a solid body guitar, so that's absolutely no issue at all. Obviously, if it was going to be a translucent finish, I would select a different body for that, because you don't want, you know, visible sort of bits of staining and things like that, sap pockets, which are, you know, make absolutely no difference to the structural integrity of the piece or its sound qualities, but they're just, you know, perhaps slightly unsightly, so we don't use that for that type of body.
Aesthetic.
So, aesthetic things, yes, indeed. So, but sometimes you get a little blemish, which it might be on one side, and if you've got a bit more meat to remove, you can remove the wood from that side and remove that blemish in the process. So it just gives you that little bit of scope for adjustment. Hello, it's Simon.
It's me.
It's Simon.
I've made an old unit.
Has he? Come, let's go and have a look. Let's go. You find me in Simon's shop next door, and this is his wonderful Dominion 15-inch planer thicknesser, which I do use for some bodies, but I'm not doing it today. I'm doing it with my sander. So This is a wonderful thing, which one day Simon will sell me for very little money. Not.
While it had all the naphtha on it and the colour, I just lit
Get
it.
it.
Went,
Go. Right, let's crack on. So it's coming on, Simon. It's looking good. The aim with this is that at the end of this process, we end up with a perfectly thicknessed body with both sides completely parallel and with as much potential for movement removed as we can. So any further machining stages, the thing will remain stable, and we can carry on and make a nice flat guitar body. So the next stage after that is to machine the perimeter, which we'll get to in a few days' time. And from there, we then move on to machining all the routes, pickup routes, tremolo routes, whatever else it might be. But all of those pick up off the perimeter of the body. But we'll get to that in a further video in a few days' time. So, right, back to thicknessing those other bodies. Thank you very much for watching.